So Games Workshop has just talked through the new Guard Regimental system in full, a fair few more details there, plus some other exciting previews in the Guard Pure Army Special rule, and also the rather disturbing ability to be able to shell your own men, provided you're hitting at least some of the enemy as well. Let's talk through the latest round of previews from Codex Astra Militarum. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we've got a bunch of previews from Games Workshop. The main focus was their new regimental system, and I thought it would be interesting to talk about the pros and cons of it, now it's been revealed in a fair bit more detail. We now have a few more details as to how the core of it will work, and they've also shown us off a few more doctrines which are a bit different to the leaked ones, plus the new Regimental Tactics rule that it looks like just about every guard unit might get. Starting out though, let's talk about this new regiment system, which does appear very different to how most 40k armies are set up these days. This has already been teased a couple of times, but now we know a bit more. Basically, guard regiments are going to be operating very differently to, say, Space Marine chapters or Eldar craft worlds or things, where you just nominate your entire army to be one specific subset of that faction. At least in tournament games, you're not allowed to mix and match between them, but selecting that faction gives you a whole bunch of special rules, passive ones that affect your whole army, but usually access to some other fun stuff as well, such as relics, stratagems, and warlord traits. It seems that for the Imperial Guard, every single regiment is now basically becoming a custom regiment, where you can match every flavour of the Imperial Guard all together in one army, such as like in a mixed battalion or something. And then it's kind of similar to the custom regiments that we got in that Psychic Awakening book, where you get to pick 2 different traits, and then that's your army. My guess is that the motivation for this was the models that the army is sold with. Guard are kind of unique throughout the armies in 40k, as perhaps more so than any other army. They actually have individual looks and feels of the miniatures that are quite different to each other. Say, for example, Valhallans being different to Deathcore, to Catachans, to Cadians. It kind of puts them in a slightly weird position rules-wise, as basically do you just make rules that favour the way that the army is modelled, and then if you turn up to a game, are people going to say, no, you can't use your Catachan models to represent Cadian rules or something like that? As the difference isn't just paint really, most of the time it's the way that the models actually look on the board. I feel that that might have been the primary motivator to go down this new system, and basically make every single regiment into a custom one, and then have some individual datasheets that hail from one regiment or another, and they'll give you a few extra advantages, but don't really do anything particularly different to most of the rest of your force. They'd already kind of hinted that that was the case, but they've given us some pretty interesting clarifications on it this time. They have confirmed that some of the traits also give you a stratagem or a better version of a stratagem that you can use elsewhere in the Codex, and they've previewed a couple of helpful ones. Perhaps one of the biggest questions that I had about the whole situation, though, was how regiment-specific characters were going to fit into this, and whether or not you were going to be penalised, say, by running Ursula Creed alongside Deathcore or something like that, but it basically does sound that that's not going to be the case, and you're going to be able to quite freely mix and match. It appears that units like Creed, the Cadian Shock Troops, or Strachan and friends, they will all get their regimental keyword in addition to the standard regimental keyword, and from the tone of the preview it does sound like the individual characters and unique units will still be getting your custom combination of doctrines and things, even all the unique special characters and things. Perhaps also pretty importantly, faction-specific officers and heroes can still order units from other regiments. Say, for example, it sounds like Ursula Creed or Ironhand Strachan will be able to order Deathcore infantry, for example. If they're all fighting together in one regiment for whatever reason, I guess it makes sense, and I honestly think that if they're going down this route, that probably is the best way to do things. Otherwise, you could actually make the individual regiment units be at a massive disadvantage, as they're locked out of some synergies with ones from others. Overall, broadly, it does sound like it's pretty good news for just fielding whatever combo of guard units that you want within an army. It doesn't look like there'd be any major disadvantage to, say, taking Sly Marbo alongside Creed and the new Lord Solar, if that happened to be the combination of units that you thought was cool or best suited your tactical plans. Otherwise, Games Workshop have previewed a bunch of regimental traits and the stratagems that key off them, including a rather interesting and disturbing artillery one for shelling your own men. They've given us 5 different previewed regimental doctrines, one of which we'd already seen before, Pray Drill for the lasguns to become heavy 2 when stationary. For me, that one doesn't look super overwhelming. It just doesn't look like lasguns are going to be quite strong enough to be your primary damage dealers, at least not with static infantry squads firing at 24 inches. Otherwise though, the others are looking kind of fun. Expert Bombardiers looks like it's been redesigned a bit since the leaked traits that we saw earlier. It now seems fairly easy to use, Basically, artillery anywhere on the board get a +1 to hit against any unit that's visible to a Voxcaster or Sentinel unit, and that seems like it could be a pretty awesome way to focus down fire on the enemy. I guess in theory you could have your artillery units hitting on 3s if Games Workshop doesn't remove the guard exemption to the barrage nerf. That does sound pretty scary on those flat damage 3 manticores that were rumoured in previous leagues. If you want to build around an artillery regiment, this is almost going to be auto-include, I think. Otherwise, Veteran Guerrillas appears to have changed a bit from the leaked version that we had earlier as well. They get to gain the keyword Veteran Guerrillas, and Infantry and Sentinels get to ignore cover within 18 inches. That looks like it's both light and dense cover. I feel like that's actually going to be most useful on things like Kazakin, to be honest, damage dealing infantry that want to be up close and personal. Those Hellguns are going to be a lot more savage if they're not trying to deal with armour of contempt layered in light cover. If you've got an army built around infantry largely dealing damage at close range, that one looks very usable to me. Otherwise, we've got Industrial Efficiency from the Steel Legion one. That one turns AP-1 attacks into AP0, now army-wide, not just on vehicles. Not a terrible damage buff, but not a lot of people are spamming loads and loads of AP-1 at the moment, with Armour of Contempt being a thing. Some armies just naturally have a lot of it though, and that will be a meaningful survivability boost against them. Still, one of the biggest unanswered questions is whether or not Guard are going to keep their Armour of Contempt on their vehicles or not. I'm pretty sure it won't be in the Codex, but will be in the next version of the balanced data slate as to whether or not they keep or lose it. Finally, we've got Grim Demeanor. Again, you get a keyword from it, and you get to ignore combat attrition modifiers in a similar sort of way to how the Valhallans functioned before. The combat attrition thing I don't think is particularly big, particularly if you might have a commissar or two around, but the keyword could be kind of fun. Speaking of which, they have shown us off 2 different stratagems from the Guard Codex that key off these individual regimental traits. The Vicious Traps one that's basically confirmed, and we've seen a couple of times already now. Mortal wounds when an enemy charges a guard unit that's entirely in cover. On a 2 to 5 you get D3, and on a 6 or more you get 2D3, but you can get an awful lot of benefits towards that roll. Firstly, if you cast Chan or have the Veteran Guerrillas keyword, +1 if you've got a Melter Mine like on the Kazakin, and +1 if Sly Marbos anywhere on the table. I guess theoretically, if you're charging some Kazakin with a Melter Mine and they got the other 2 benefits, then that could be 2d3 mortal wounds on a 3+. A little bit on the situational side, but say if it brought down a character that was on low health that was just about to massacre a guard unit, that could be great. Otherwise though, and I feel like one that might be quite powerful for the guard, is the Acceptable Losses stratagem. This is basically 1 CP to order one of your units to just shoot into combat regardless of the consequences. You have one of your platoon keyworded units locked up, you select any one of your other units on the table for 1 CP, and then that unit can just light up the enemy unit that's tagged in combat with that unit. You can't re-roll any hit rolls, and any ones to hit your squad rather than theirs. If you happen to have the Valhallan style Grim Demeanor as your regimental tag, that can be used on basically any unit throughout your army, it would seem. So you could even have something like a Hardy Lehman Russ tagged in combat, and then light up the enemy with a bunch of mortars on it that might do more damage to them than your Russ. It's all a bit disturbing and meat grindery, but also very guard, I suppose. You have some poor luckless infantry holding the line, and all of a sudden they have a big manticore barrage come down out of nowhere. Hopefully kill a lot more of the enemy than it kills of them, but I'm sure they'd take some casualties. That stratagem does seem like a bit of a game changer for the guard, to be honest. They're a primarily shooting army, besides maybe those rough riders now, and if the enemy is unable to hide in combat at all, then that's basically going to be a good thing. I don't think it's quite good enough to make me want to take the Grim Demeanor one though, that just seems like too much to pass up, but it's really useful on platoon units I suppose. Otherwise, here are the other leaked regimental traits. It does look like this list could be at least a little bit out of date now, given that Games Workshop's previewed ones are slightly different to a couple of them. The Guerrillas one seems to have changed to ignore cover from getting cover yourself, and I feel like the leaked version of the Artillery one might have got lost in translation at some point. It sounds kind of similar, but not quite the same as the one that Games Workshop have confirmed. Otherwise though, throughout this list, I feel like the ones like the +points range to all weapons and the single reroll whenever you shoot both look pretty interesting. And so does the Mechanized Infantry one, where you get to disembark after moving if that one stays. Could be really fun for delivering something like Kazakin as a big punch. Overall, I'd say I'm a little bit unsure as to whether I'm too sold on the new system of regiments as to whether it's going to be better or worse. I feel like there are definitely positives and negatives. Some people will like the new system, but some people might not so much. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it down in the comments. There are definitely some positives. Guard regiments do fight in mixed forces in the lore, and it does make sense to have mixed battalions with different units fighting alongside each other. Though while I would say it's not against the law, it's certainly not against the law to have slightly more pure regiments hailing from one particular world. though I guess there's nothing to stop you building an army as such. I think perhaps the biggest win for this is that it means modelling concerns aren't really a big issue. Say, for example, if you turn up to a game with all the Death Corps models, people seeing the army might well just expect you to be using their given regimental trait and things, and if, as it has been in the past, it turns out to be a really underwhelming one, you either have the choice of being a bit penalised rules-wise, or having to do a bit of proxy and saying basically, yes, my Death Corps are using the Cadian tactics now because they're better. These new rules will basically override that situation, and it means that however your army is modelled, you will be able to choose the rules that you want without confusing anyone or having to have a conversation pre-game. I think it is quite fun to be able to freely combine any of the guard choices that you like under one banner. It means that you can take any of the special characters and the regiment-specific units, and it won't break your doctrines or anything like that, so that is kind of interesting. And the system does have the advantage of the other custom tactics type rules. You can basically just look at the units that you're using in your army and decide which tactics are going to be best for using them with. If you just fancy running loads of artillery, for example, you could run the one that makes them better with the bonus to hit near Voxcasters. As for potential downsides though, I do wonder if they might have slightly oversolved the problem. The modellings versus rules debate was a small one, but I feel like at least for the majority of people who I played with, I don't think many would have cared too much if I turned up with Cadian models and played them as Cathchans or Death Corps or something. Certainly in most competitive games, I feel like the emphasis is on the rules, and any nice modelling that you've done is just a nice bonus rather than the main focus. With Cadians basically being the only major regiment that Games Workshop sold for a long time, you have all sorts of people counter their Cadians as different regiments when they wanted to, and it didn't necessarily cause the biggest issues before. I do feel that it might also cause some issues with the regiment-specific units that they do have now, things like the Cadian shock troops and the unique data sheets for the Caschan jungle fighters and the Death Corps squad. You might feel a bit more obliged to either use those models or not use the rules, and again you're back to the same quandary as to whether or not you're mixing and matching and compromising your army aesthetic just to use some certain data sheets that might well be better than the standard infantry squad. Again, perhaps most people will be happy to say, yes, this squad with the red shoulder pads or something are my Cadian shock troops, even if they're modelled as Valhallans like the rest of my army is. Another downside is that it looks like we're losing a fair few strong support options for the different regiments. Say, for example, you'd usually have your own unique warlord trait, relic, and order and things. Plus, it looks like while those doctrines, a fair few of them have some boosted stratagems, not all of them do. I feel that's kind of sad in a way. The Cadians, for example, had their overlapping fields of fire, and it made it a bit of a different way to play guard, so it might be a bit of a flavour lost there. Finally, it also might make guard armies a little bit more homogenised, basically just having one single optimal solution for if you want to play strong guard, this is the way it goes, rather than having multiple different builds. I guess that's not inherent. You might be able to have, say, a cavalry-themed force with some regimental tactics, or a tank-themed force with others, but still with every single army having access to the exact same options of traits and things, I feel like you're quite likely to see the same few being picked time and again. I'll be interested to hear your guys' thoughts on that though. What do you make of the new regimental rules? Are they good or bad? Finally, and as if we haven't talked enough regiments for one day, we also have Regimental Tactics. This appears to be the confirmed pure army for the Imperial Guard, the one that you get if your entire army is Astra Militarum, and it doesn't include any other allies besides things like Agents of the Imperium or unaligned fortifications and things. This one is a rule that was already introduced in the balanced data slate. It's the one that allows orders to splash across multiple different units, and it is quite a nice quality of life thing, meaning that you maybe don't need quite as many spammed orders within an army, and you can just focus on having a few commanders. The way it works is that when you target a unit to receive an order, provided the rule is in effect, that order can affect any and all platoon or squadron keyworded units within 6 inches of the unit that you initially ordered. So say for example, if you had a tank commander order a nearby Lehman Russ, any other Lehman Russes within the 6 inches, they could also receive that same order if it made sense to. I feel like it's really quite a nice quality of life rule. It means that you can just have one commander issue an order to an entire formation rather than just one squad, and it doesn't stop you from issuing multiple different orders if you can, and having different units do different things if that makes more sense. I feel like the Lord Solar model is going to be absolutely mental with that, issuing 3 different orders and having access to any of the order trees. It could be ordering half your army in one go, and with some fairly specific and tailored ones. Overall, as an army rule, if this is the only pure army rule, then I'd say that it's interesting but not 100% vital. Depending on what units that you're taking and how reliant they are on orders, you might be able to just get by with just one order per one unit, and just have that as a trade-off for fielding a bunch of nasty allies. Maybe if you wanted some knights as backup or something, or you're creating a fluffy themed list where you have some guard joined by some grey knights or something. It also might be good news for including small detachments of guard as well. Losing the rule isn't going to be so powerful that it's going to make the army unusable, I think. And I feel like the actual big thing that you might be passing up on by taking allies like that might be the faction-specific secondaries, which are generally something that you really want, at least in Nephilim. Still though, it seems useful enough. Splashy orders that are pretty handy if you do have them, but not absolutely game-breaking if you don't. Perhaps not the most exciting thing ever though, as we already have those before from the balanced data slate. So there we have it, Games Workshop's new regimental system. Let me know what you make of the new rules, and whether or not you think it's a good system for the Guard compared with the standard regimental trait, stratagem, warlord trait, and relic. As always, look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular guard videos coming. There's going to be loads to talk about in the run-up to and the release of the Codex. Looking forward to reviewing the book in full once we get it. Finally, if you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, which is how I can afford to keep on making videos like this quite so regularly. If you are enjoying quite a bit, then any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.